Hi. Hello.
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 Hello and welcome to Architecting.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Wagner, here with the host of Architecting, Adam Wagner. Hey, Adam, who's on the podcast today?
Hey, so today we have a special show, and I've been saying we have a special show a lot. And I need to stop that because if every show is special, then it's not special. But today is actually special. So today is a recording of the first live event that we've ever done. So this was for Denver Design Week, sponsored by Modern in Denver, and we were at Pair Workplace Solutions office downtown in Denver.
Who was on the panel?
So I give a little more of an introduction in the beginning of this, so I'm not going to go into it too deep, but this was a panel about starting your own firm. And so we had Stephen Dynia of Dynia Architects, Kevin Nguyen of Regular Architecture, and Joana Emhof and Hans Osheim of ArcDen Studio. And what did you think? You were there.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. It was really fun and just really natural.
Yeah, I mean, I think I started this with the goal of creating community and really wanting to do some live events. And this was our first live event with people and with questions coming in from the audience. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. So check it out.
Yeah, check it out. Hey everyone, Adam just left the studio, so I'm commandeering the microphone. I need to tell you about an amazing opportunity. It's an AIA grassroots program called the Christopher Kelly Leadership Development Program. This is a 9-month competitive program for 16 emerging professionals. The class gathers once a month for a half-day session where you get to dive deep on topics like research and technology, community engagement, contracts and negotiation, and entrepreneurship, all through the lens of leadership. I've been a participant myself and on the executive committee for 2 years, and I can't speak highly enough about the benefits. If you get accepted into this program, you will leave with a strengthened network, targeted helpful AEC industry knowledge, inspiration, and incredible friendships. You can find out more and start filling out the live application on the website, aiacolorado.org/Christopher Kelly Leadership Development Program. Applications are due by December 6th, and the class kicks off in late January. Check it out.
Hey, what are you doing?
Welcome to this live architecting event here. This feels really official, like a real talk show host with a desk. I didn't know I'd have a desk. I thought we'd have some nice chairs, but get them up high and. So I'm Adam Wagner. I'm a local architect, a new firm, Vessel Office of Architecture. I teach at CU, and about a year ago I started this little niche podcast. And I think when I started this, I had two goals of just trying to hear people's stories and kind of collect stories in the community, and then kind of build up a larger community and help connect people. And I've been just really thankful and impressed by the amount of people who are listening to this and the amount of kind of connections that we've been having. And so I thank you all for listening. I want to thank William Logan and Modern in Denver, especially. During last summer, I tore down a fence and I didn't know what to do with the wood, so I built a treehouse. And then I paid JC Buck some margaritas and some tacos to take some pictures of it. And I sent it over to Modern in Denver. And after a few months, I had a published treehouse and I had a sponsored podcast. So I think it's been awesome. I think anybody who knows William just knows how fantastic of a networker he is and how passionate he is about this community. And so yeah, I'm very thankful to him for kind of helping me out here and helping to spread the word of this podcast. So that brings me to this event today, which we're calling the Voyage Out, Stories of the Early Days of Colorado's Top Architecture Firms. I was kind of kicking around some different ideas about things to talk about, but really I just like hearing good stories, and especially about how people started, and especially because about 2 months ago I started this architecture firm, actually with my partner back there, Justin Towert, who's joining us from Connecticut this week. But so I'm very fresh into a new firm, but this is my third firm. I've had another firm with my wife Rebecca when we were 23 for a few years, and then another firm a few years ago where I just got lonely by myself and went and worked for another firm. So I think this is the third time's the charm. But so then I gathered these three fantastic architects here. We have Stephen Dynia, who was one of the first podcast guests, and one of the early people that I reached out to when I moved here. And then I just like meeting people and hearing news stories. So I reached out to two people who I'd never met, or two firms, three people who I'd never met before, and gracious enough to come on. So we have Kevin Nguyen, a sole proprietor of Regular Architecture, and we have Hans Osheim and Joana. I got in my head that I was going to mess it up. It's such an easy word. Joana Emhof, so Stephen, of course, has had his firm for a long time. The good FAIA older member amongst us. And Kevin has had his firm kind of a medium range of like 10 years. And then Joana and Hans I thought they were really early on, but they're like 2 to 3 years. So I kind of had a range of people and experiences. So the format of this is we're going to have kind of 3 parts. So the first part is going to be a sort of origin story. So kind of Pecha Kucha-style. They've all provided 10 slides, 5 minutes, kind of get a little overview of their stories. And then we're going to open it up with a sort of panel discussion amongst the rest of them. And then we'll open it up for kind of question and answer. So I like this size group. It's better than like the little closet I'm normally in by myself talking with people, and it's not overwhelming and huge. So this is fantastic.
Thanks, Johnny.
Thanks for coming. Yeah. So, so I think we'll just dive in. So we're going to let Stephen go first with the most experience. So.
Okay, so I started working in New York for Skidmore, Owings and Merrill in the 1980s, and I shifted and I opened a practice in Jackson Hole in the mid-90s, and it was a radical and stark transition in context from the work that I was doing in New York and the environment I was in to this hamlet surrounded by nature instead of containing nature. I thought I only get 5 seconds per story.
30 seconds. I know I couldn't keep you to 5 seconds, but you get 30 seconds, and that was right on 30 seconds.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So many of you know this, some of you don't, but you'll learn to understand recessions as a regular feature of a career in architecture, and I had been through several of them. In fact, I worked for an architect that followed Eero Saarinen's death. He did not get to be made partner, and he started his own firm. The first thing I worked on was windows on the world in the North Tower of the original Trade Center. This is what I transitioned to from the context of New York, which, I will say that nature rules, and nature is has an impact on daily life kind of poetically and practically. It was really shocking to do buildings in an environment where you had a sense of hot and cold, where snow piled up. And this was the first major project we did in the late 90s. And, I used everything I was thinking of from my days of growing up in New Haven with Eero Saarinen and especially Louis Kahn being really in my head. And it was a moment frame building with the skin of the building separate from the structure so that windows could go anywhere. And there's a lot of stories in that building. Anyway, this is a little sampling of our work, but it is primarily saying that we've done 30 or 40 major houses or significant houses, and we have always built models and still do. and mock-ups. The studio in Jackson is really a shop. It's in an industrial building, and we have tools, and it's a little bit of an ID shop. The pinnacle of the work in Jackson Hole was the Performing Arts Center, which we were the design architects for, and that was very exciting because you do private houses, you're not engaging architecture fully with public experience, right? And to do a performing arts center where it becomes a cultural icon in the middle of a village was pretty exciting stuff at that time, and really talked about architecture and human experience, and that kind of got me wound up to go to Denver and take up those opportunities. But this is sort of the result of it. I'm going to the airport at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. I stop at the coffee shop. There's a pile of the weekly newspaper, and I see this one on top, right? So I know I've been irritating enough people in Jackson and changing the way they think about architecture, and I had to have it. I took it, it's great. And anyway, coming to Denver, I had an opportunity to work with the Zeppelins. My vehicle into that was Will Bruder, but we did that freight residence repurposing on the top left. And after the recession, we just started our way through the site, doing master plans and doing buildings when the money was available. And the building on top is a condominium building on 18th and Gaylord. And I show that so that everybody doesn't think that I only work with the Zeppelins. But we just got a Colorado AIA award for that project. And down below is a lot of the stuff that I've done with the Zeppelins, And it really taught me about developing a relationship with a developer where you really get to understand each other's quirks and how to work together, and with them, there were a lot of quirks, and we kind of were able to understand what their point of view was and where they were coming from and where they were going, and help them along with that. So, I'll say that whatever firm you have, whatever point of view, the human resources are the most important thing. That if you can get the right people and keep them, it's the most important thing. Do anything to make them welcome and feel purposeful, because it'll pay off. And we had some of these people have been with the firm since the beginning or near the beginning, and the firm is about 27 years old.
Great, thank you.
We did this picture, by the way, during the pandemic. We couldn't get the offices in Jackson Hole and Denver together physically, so we created this thing in the field.
That was nice. You were right at 5 minutes. I didn't know how.
I like to keep to those schedules.
Nice.
I understand having been moderator.
Yeah.
I'm targeting 2:30, so we're gonna need it.
Oh, 2:30. We had Stephen was one of the earlier guests, and we were doing it on Instagram Live, and I didn't realize you could only do like a 45-minute long interview, and I kept seeing the 45 minutes coming up, and I didn't know if it would cut us off or not, and his story was too good, and I couldn't cut it off, and then it kicked us off, and we had to restart it. And so those early podcasts are much worse, but okay.
So I started regular architecture in 2014. It was actually Win Lawrence at the time with a buddy of mine, Scott Lawrence. And these first two pictures are going to kind of show the idea of like why I started the firm, which I think to me was super interesting because as an architect, I never thought about starting a firm. To me, like that didn't make any sense to me. It wasn't something I wanted to do. I worked in weird corporate firms coming out of school and always had my task and what I wanted to do. And in December of 2014, we got two phone calls. One was Hop Alley, this restaurant that I'm sure people have been to in Denver. And the other was from a person we had at Immersion Workshop. So Scott and I started this program called Immersion Workshop, which was an education program that we did yearly to teach people about site-contextual architecture and what that meant. And for me, meeting some of these incredible people like Rick Joy, Richard Plassier, Peter Stutchbury, they sort of explained to me like what being your true architect is about and what that can be. So developing something that's you and how you want to build your goals. And we were lucky enough to get this project, Hop Alley. as well as a residential project that sort of kicked off this firm and what we were doing with it. And for the first 3 years, I worked my full-time job, 68 hours a week, and then every night would come home and work on some of these more fun projects where I got a little bit more satisfaction out of them, and I got to work directly with some people that I've grown to be friends. And the reason that image was there was because it was a night sitting at Hop Alley with my wife, where my mood was just significantly different. She was just like, "What's going on here? What's happening?" And it was this time when I realized that the work that I was doing, which was primarily developer based, dollars based, kind of just very cookie cutter would be the way to describe it. A lot of it just wasn't making me happy, and it wasn't fulfilling me as an architect. So I had the opportunity to just leap, and that was sort of the catalyst that caused that leap to happen. There was a lot of days sitting. This was the residential project we did. We did a full gut of this mid-century home in Wash Park, and Scott and I actually just lived with a little wireless hotspot for about 3 weeks doing the construction drawings inside the house, which was super fun to just go take a tape measure, whenever you sort of needed those things. But the focus of the firm generally has been about maintaining and creating relationships and really understanding the product typologies. So we've dug super deep into the restaurant typology and hospitality and understanding how these chefs and restaurateurs work within their spaces. And the other focus is working solely with people who are the end users. So I want to work with people who are going to use the space at the end of the day. I feel like there's more investment from the clients, and I'm allowed to create a better relationship with them and understand what they're doing. The previous picture, the to-go boxes and the white things were, that was us actually putting those up and getting to go from Hop Alley. So I was working with the restaurateur, putting up these, we were on a lift and it was dangerous and we hit ourselves in the head more than once, but it was super fun. And then, this was sort of the next one in line. This was a project where we sort of just moved in. This was the only project we were working on at the time. It was right after I decided to quit my real job. It was, so we were just intensely invested in what this meant for the firm and for us growing up as an architecture firm. So, we were there all the time, doing different pieces, probably more involved than we should have been. And that's probably the lesson that I keep teaching myself more often and over again. And, testing ideas. I bought a welder, I learned how to weld, I learned how to paint, doing woodwork, and all these things to just sort of test out ideas and also try to put my little touch on a lot of these projects. And in some ways that's a great idea, in some ways it's a horrible idea. But it's been really fun, and the clients seem to really appreciate that connection. We're doing these sort of lists like individual art pieces for every project that come directly from the firm, and they get to hold on to that as part of their restaurant as they grow up, which has been super fun. But for me, probably the most surprising thing about this, and something I didn't think architecture was, is for me, the architecture firm as a whole has been a way to garnish relationships and to create change. So these last couple of pictures are just a bunch of my clients and the trips and things that I've been able to do with them. But it's also been my opportunity to use architecture as a medium of change. So I'm heavily involved with this group actually creating a new chain for grain storage and how we're growing natural and heritage grains. So we're actually developing new ways to do stone milling and create flour. We're designing spaces for them that help them more efficiently get it out to their clients, help them sell it better, and then push that through the restaurant. So creating the restaurant designs in a way that helps them to push their ideologies. So it's been really fun getting super deep into this sort of world where we're just trying to push a different idea and using building design and space and how we experience things to grow that.
Cool. Thank you. All right.
Okay, so I'm Joana and this is Hans again. We are not only partners at ArcDen, we're also a husband and wife team. We met way back in 2006 at the CU Masters of Architecture program, obviously well before the redevelopment of Union Station, and we've been together ever since.
So after graduation, we did started our careers, had some great opportunities and some great offices to really hone our skill and knowledge and craft of architecture and design. I was focused more on single-family residential work, and Joana was at larger scale offices where she was focused on mixed-use educational and civic work.
And so, well, after our careers were kind of underway, we decided to get married. And soon thereafter, we had 2 daughters who very quickly became the inspiration in our life, in our work, and the true motivation for starting ArcDen Studio. Back in the spring of 2018, I took the step to quit my current architecture job and take some time off to really reflect on what I wanted to do next with my career. At that point, I started to consider going off on my own, and soon after that, I got my first couple jobs. And I didn't really have anything set up. I didn't have an office, so I would rent out space at the Cherry Creek Public Library and host consultants there. And my jobs that I took on were less than ideal, to say it lightly, but they were a great educational learning experience for me and a great starting point.
Yeah, so in the winter of 2019, I had the opportunity. It was kind of at a crossroads, and so Joana and I decided that we would go all in, and I would join her in this venture. So we opened up our basement office with the kids in tow, doing their part, and we had to. This is really when we developed the brand and kind of dove in, like I said, head first into what we were doing. And this was also when we got kind of our first kind of real big commission, and this was for us a bit of a dream job to remodel a mid-century home in Arapahoe Hills. And there was a lot of opportunity in the home. Things, for a small example like this, bench on the exterior of the home, which ran in and became a hearth on this amazing fireplace on the interior, but was just lost in this hodgepodge of poor additions and just poor design.
So with this project and others in our office, we started to gain some momentum. And at this point, we decided to grow up and move out of our basement. And we got our first office in an almost empty warehouse. And we hired our first full-time employee also at this time. And this move really allowed us to spread out and delve more deeply into the design process. And it was just when we started to feel like we were having more fun, and we were like, okay, this was the right move. Let's keep going.
Yeah, so concurrent to this, we still were heavily focused on this remodel, and this was, an opportunity that we knew was going to be, we needed to be successful for the office to grow and continue. So we really poured ourselves into the design of the project to, draw out what had become kind of a rundown home, and so we feel like we were pretty successful, as you can see with the before and after photos of drawing out the beauty of this home potential.
Yeah, so momentum was continuing, growth was continuing, and then the pandemic hit and the world stopped. Those are some shelves in our local grocery store. And really everyone at this point was unsure of what the future held, including us. And around the same time, we had our first publication in Modern in Denver, which we were just so grateful for the timing of, because it really inspired us and motivated us to just keep going. So that's exactly what we did. And soon thereafter, we were able to open our own storefront. We now have a team of 5. Wish I had a picture of them, but we just had our first professional photos done all together last week. So, but while a lot has changed in the last 3 years for us, a lot has also stayed the same. As you can see in this picture, Hans and I hosting a pretty important design meeting with a client over Zoom, and our daughter there at my desk with her stuff everywhere in the background. So.
Just producing drawings and
Yeah,
handing them to
yeah,
you.
producing
And,
for us.
yeah,
Yes.
it's a reality.
And so, while things may look put together and organized on the surface, you just never know what's going on behind the scenes and motivating us.
Great. Well, thank you. And thanks to these four, like in typical architect fashion, I didn't tell them about this presentation until like a week and a half ago, and so they scrambled and sent it to me last night. And so thank you for doing this. I think 5 minutes is way too short. Like I got to spend an hour and a half or whatever with Stephen, really hearing his story, and I think you guys did an excellent job kind of summing up your stories in 5 minutes. But I look at your work, Stephen, and the things you put up there, and it inspires me and annoys me because it's so good. But I remember you talking about sort of those first years and like sort of why you chose to leave SOM in New York doing these big projects, going to Jackson, and then it was like 5 years where you were kind of banging your head a little bit, and what was that experience like?
Well, the SOM thing was a lot of fun in the 80s. It was, we were arrogant little shits. We were talking, I remember working in London for a couple of months, and this was in the mid-late 80s, and we were talking about getting on an SST and flying back in time in the year 2000 to catch New Year's at every capital. It just gives you a sense of the mindset of a firm like SOM. At that time was the biggest in the world, I think, right? And everybody just wanted to do big work, and it was the scale of the environment was enormous, and the recession actually it took a long time for them to cull the firm, and it went from like 450 to 180 in New York. And I just started to realize that I'm not particularly really good at politics. And if you're not really good at politics, and I mean not just average, I could survive, but I mean if you can't do that, this probably isn't the place for you. And even I was in the design department in New York. It was a departmentalized firm with a design and a technical department, and I just started to realize. And then I went and visited somebody in Jackson Hole, and I had no idea, because I love New York and I didn't go out west much at all, right? But I realized that there was incredible historically amount of resources in that town. That the Rockefellers had donated the land for Grand Teton National Park. There was the history of the Mies van der Rohe house. The lore of that was very attractive. And it's a very conservative environment, mostly draws in financial guys from New York. And they want to play the, frontier fantasy game, right? And I just saw this opportunity of a lot of money, no modern houses, right? And how could you how can I nudge my way into that place? And it took a good bit of time to get the credibility for people to trust, So you had to have something, and I just came from a firm. What am I going to show them? Office towers, in Jackson Hole. It was just, I had nothing to really work with, and I just didn't want to work with anybody there really, because there were no forward-thinking firms at that point, And so it was a slog to start out, and finally, we got some traction. And then once that happened, it just kind of steamrolled. And I didn't really plan on staying there necessarily, because I don't particularly do well in a small town. In fact, 2 years before I moved to Jackson Hole, I was working in San Francisco for SOM doing a project in Singapore, and they offered to hire me there, and the partner who had sent me there in New York, was allowing this to happen if I wanted. And I said, no, I couldn't. San Francisco is too small. I couldn't possibly live in San Francisco. And then 2 years later, I'm living in Jackson Hole, and that thing was so radically different that it was amusing for about 5 years. Just the comparisons, like FAR of 100, it's like crazy small buildings, and always trying to fight for doing new things, but finally took hold, and we made some progress.
But there was enough like energy and excitement in that process that carried you for 5 years of doing work that you weren't
I'd say
super
that,
excited about?
there were things to grab onto, like we did smaller things, and houses that weren't fully free. We didn't have the full freedom to do what we wanted to work with with a client, but times were changing a little bit as I was getting up there. And I will say that Will Bruder did 3 very forward-looking buildings in Jackson Hole and made that easier for us to proceed. He introduced some radical ideas. And if you think that thing in the newspaper, he was getting like things in the mail where they cut out letters from a magazine the whole way, they never come back. I mean, that's how.
yeah. Fill some space. Yeah.
No, I really appreciated him because he had the muscle to come in, like make his hit and then leave. Right? He didn't have to stay around for the crap, and deal with it.
And so then, Kevin, like with you jumping off and then getting very specific on smaller projects where it seemed like you had a lot more control over the design and the design direction. What was that like to have that, but be sort of like so focused on smaller projects, and then how to lead to your decision to just be one person and not have anybody else? And
it's probably entirely selfish, would be the short answer. For me, the small projects, coming from working with sort of big firms. I mean, the firm I left was 100 people. And I was doing project management. I wasn't touching design. I wasn't really doing anything. I got really good at figuring out details and getting things through permit. And to me, that wasn't architecture. So when I had this opportunity to really deep dive into projects and work directly with clients and understand what they wanted, understand the typology, understand how space works and how people experience that space, and then see it come to fruition throughout the design process, and then how we start to finally build it. I just sort of fell in love with that. So I've sort of designed the entire practice around this idea of how can I stay heavily involved in all of those pieces as long as I can. And I'm going to grasp onto it for as long as possible. And right now, the technique is really just trying not to take on more work than I can handle. And turning down projects, as backwards as that sounds, is I lost my job in 2009, and you bring up the recessions, like that was one of the big sort of triggers for me too, is understanding that this isn't always going to be a great thing that we're riding on top of. And last year was definitely a big gut check for me, working with restaurants and primarily in hospitality. And I lost 90% of my work on March 14th. It all came back. And it's back with a vengeance now. But there were a few months last year where I was real scared. I was like, what am I doing? Am I going to be back working in an office again? But I'm just really trying to hold on to this idea that I can be heavily involved in a lot of different aspects, be on the job site, work on these super fun details, and see the things in my mind come to fruition. So there's always the thing, maybe there's someone else involved in that. But right now, I'm just loving it. So
yeah. And then for you guys, like we had a good coffee the other day, kind of talking about the beginning of the firm a little bit, but how, it seemed like you came together and you kind of brought projects in more than you kind of would have thought, and then were able to hire people pretty quickly and build this good team. What was that experience like?
It was, I don't want to say frenetic, but it was definitely like there was a lot of work, and there was a lot of kind of like what Kevin was alluding to, was like, do we turn this down, or do we take it and figure out how to make it work. And yeah, so when we started, we did have a few projects, and we were able to kind of juggle those and balance those. But it became clear pretty quickly that we that we needed more help, but also that we wanted more help, and that we wanted to grow and be at a scale where we could have our hands kind of in things, but not be totally buried and have some opportunity to grow and evolve.
And then one of the cornerstones, of our office from the beginning is that we just wanted to offer ourselves and our employees a little bit more flexibility in general. So we knew in order to be able to offer that, we had to have help. And so that was one of our goals, was to right away bring on the right person that would help us be able to manage projects and also offer that flexibility. And we took a little bit of a hit financially starting off doing that, but the balance and flexibility that we got out of it was well worth it. So
Yeah, nice. Well, let's take. Is there any questions? Any other stories for anybody here?
How did you go about just, besides the initial projects that you got, then trying to get the additional projects to follow? I just went out on my own, and I had a similar thing where I'm like, cool, someone wants to hire me, I'm gonna do this. Wait, how do I get the next one?
Yeah. You want to say your name and
Alexis.
and what's your firm?
Counterculture Studio, and I just moved here from Salt Lake, so I started building a base there, and then I moved here, and now I'm back to Salt Lake.
You want to jump in on the panel? And, how do you get the second one?
So I guess right away I would say we really, throughout our careers, we focused a lot on building relationships with other architects in the industry. And this was probably one of the biggest surprises for us that came out of starting our firm, is so many people that we, nurtured relationships with over the years showed up and sent us referrals. And that is truly what got us going. And then, one client turns, they send a referral, and it just kind of keeps snowballing. So, I would say.
Yeah, because it was definitely those architecture and design network things, but it was also like real estate agents and contractors and other things like that.
Learn to juggle.
Yeah.
I mean, if you are a sole practitioner, or you don't have the breadth of, say, having somebody who is, starting out. And I was talking to William earlier, talking about KPF. KPF, one was the designer, one was the golden, like you could get jobs from anywhere, right? And the other guy was, I guess, Fox was the business guy. But the fact that you have to be all of those things, and you're never going to be all of those things, right? Because your nature is going to show you, are you shy? Are you outgoing? How good are you at building those relationships, right? And, you need to analyze it and understand it, and know that you have to apply yourself and say that, I need to put on my promotional hat right now, right? And then I need to put on my design hat, right? And, and then the business stuff, and I learned through the years of doing a lot of those things that, I needed to offload eventually the things that I didn't do well and understand exactly what it was that I was not good at and figure out how to get someone else to do it.
How's that work when you're by yourself, Kevin?
It sucks. You know exactly what I'm at. Yeah, I waste too much time doing it. The short answer. But yeah, for me, it was from the first two projects that we did, there was about a 1.5 year gap until the next project came. And that next project sort of just was like a springboard. It was just wild. Like they just all started falling into place. And a lot of it for me is the relationship base, and different than architecture, real estate, things like that. Like I embedded myself in the industry that I wanted to work in, and I'm at weird industry events. I'm meeting new chefs, meeting new people, and then I just get the phone calls. So I spend way too much time eating.
You're smart, yeah. Yeah. Rebecca would always say, like, why are you making a podcast for other architects? You're just interviewing your competitors. Like, make a podcast with lawyers or bankers or some clients that you could actually get projects out of. But I don't want to talk to those guys. Yeah.
So I have a question about that, like, work-life balance enigma. And I think part of the reason that I started independent practice was, because of the pandemic and having small kids and being at home and then taking on small projects and then having them grow. So I guess my question for you is it possible to be less than a full-time employee on your own, but be successful enough to pay all your bills? And, is it easier to balance when you're on your own versus when you're at a firm and you can't control your hours and your deadlines? And
I definitely feel like it's easier to balance on your own. Like the day-to-day stresses are less. Like if I have to drop everything and go pick up my daughter, like not a big deal. Nobody's gonna be like, whoa. But but the other stresses are way bigger. It's like more long-term stresses, I guess. Yeah. So it's easier to balance those day-to-day things, but the other stresses are more intense. But I think if you've got that balance, it's easier to handle. That's why it's great for us, because we can strategize and work together. And again, having employees that can give us some backup helps a lot.
Yeah, because I think that's interesting for you guys, for your team. But like to the question of, can you be like a 70% sole proprietor and still get it to work?
That's my goal.
Yeah.
No, that's my end game. And the reality is I've been trying to be very specific about who I'm working with, the type of work that I'm doing, and how I'm growing, because my intent is for that sort of fee gap to shrink, and that I'm getting a bigger fee for less projects, and doing a better job on those products. So being able to really dig deep into a few projects a year versus doing a dozen, and doing that in a way that helps to grow that. Right now, like I would say, like part of the reason I love what I'm doing, and part of the reason I'm afraid to hire people and all these things, and some of it's probably dumbfounded, but it's that I really like my level of lifestyle and the life that I'm living, because there are weeks where I feel like I'm that part-time employee that's just kind of hanging out and not doing too much, and it's really relaxing. And then there are weeks where I'm working way too much and life sucks, and I'm like, why am I doing these drawings again? To hire 5 people that have done them for me already. But overall, I think like it's a fun balance, and I have control over it. And to me, like having that control makes even those busy weeks feel less busy somehow. It doesn't make any sense. For me, the biggest negative being a sole proprietor is I don't feel like you ever turn off. So this idea of like trying to go on vacation, like that just doesn't even seem like a real thing to me right now.
When I think also like you seems like you're really getting into a specialization, right?
Yeah.
And trying to get really good at that one thing, and then raise the fees up on that.
Exactly.
Is it possible to do it when you're a generalist?
It's got to be more difficult.
Yeah.
I know, like I'm definitely trying to do some other type, get into some other typologies just out of pure interest and trying to just figure different things out. Because that's part of the fun of being in architecture, is you're constantly learning, right? Every product typology is different, but it's definitely harder, I think, because I feel like there's so much more front end work that I have to do personally to feel comfortable doing a job. Whereas when I'm jumping into some of these more hospitality based projects, I feel like I have that piece in the back of my head that allows me to take that first leap where others couldn't.
I got this. Yeah.
I guess in that same thread, this is more for Stephen, I think, but how do you start to grow your project typology from when you're first starting out into something much larger?
Yeah, well, don't ever talk to me about work-life balance. I don't know anything about that. I was very enthusiastic when doing large projects in New York, right? This was fun, but I just think architecture is architecture, and I'll bite into anything. So we are very much generalists, and no one's starting a practice in a resort community is everyone is going to do it based on single family high-end houses, right? Because that's the only place there's really a fee to make it all work. But then I went for local workforce housing, and we did probably 7 or 8 workforce housing projects in Teton County. And then, of course, the Performing Arts Center was interesting. I've always been on arts boards in that community, and I was on the board that was raising eventually $35 million to build that arts complex, which was all private money. And so they had a dispute with the architect on the first phase, and I saw the opportunity, and I took it. And I also did a bunch of restaurants in Jackson, because I'd just go after anything. I just thought everything is a new learning thing, and of course it's insane, but I learned the abuse early in SOM. 16-hour days, 6 to 8 weeks, right? I mean, you just got used to that's the way it is, and I can't say that I really approve of that or carry it on to my own firm, which I'm at this point I'm actually bringing in other owners because I need to offload some of my burden, and I'm realizing that it's getting time is going by. Upper 60s, and I better do something about
16-hour days.
That doesn't work anymore. But it is not easy to do it, and it's wise to specialize, obviously, right? Because you're reusing your knowledge. I just always got very excited about something entirely new. Right now we're doing a coal to carbon fiber campus in Sheridan, Wyoming. So that's a whole new learning experience, right? And the problem with it is that, so I have one performing arts center and then another one that I did the planning for in Michigan, but it's not enough for me to get more, projects of that scale, right? They're going to look for somebody who's done 5 of them, and that's true for other project types. I tried to get a history society museum in Jackson Hole, and I didn't have somebody on the team who was like, museum tested, right? And someone else got it. But, it's always an emotional thing about getting or losing projects, right?
Yeah. So Adam Steinbeck with UNM. So he's obviously their firm's growing, a lot of good stuff going on, a lot of restaurants and things, and then also single family, and you're creating your own kind of like homes company and kind of growing in a different way. So how are you guys dealing with that of trying to jump scales or get to that next step? Okay. Can I get your notes after this? Yeah.
No, I think that's been our struggle too, and obviously I think the pandemic's been a little bit of a gut check, like you mentioned before. I think we've entertained the idea of going after RFPs or competitions, and I'm just curious if any of the speakers today have considered that or gone after that as a way to jump their portfolio base. And I hate that reasoning behind the chicken or the egg. You can't do it if you don't have it. But sometimes you just gotta fake it, or as architects we can put some things together enough that looks like we can do it. And I think ultimately that's where we've been able to branch a little bit. So I was just curious, like, is that an avenue for anybody up there as far as going after open competitions or RFPs, or is that something that's still?
You just got to be careful which ones you go after and know something about the politics of it, right? Often these RFPs have they're not really fair, that there's favored parties involved.
Not as open as
You know,
we'd like, sure.
Yeah, and you have to really be careful because you put a lot of resources into going after that stuff, right? And if you do it repeatedly, and I mean, I learned a lesson in that made me very careful about what I would go after and understand who was making the decisions, and we've gotten very few things in that way, but I would encourage it. I think that it is a viable way to up your game.
Tried one, didn't go well.
There we go. Portfolio. Now you have a competition or an RFP?
An RFP.
We tried one as well, actually in collaboration with Building Collective with Chris here. And it was, for me, I was sitting in on the interview, and it was definitely a huge learning experience because I was invited to the interview because of my previous experience on some larger projects. And, sitting in there, the very first question right out the gate was a really big question about process on a specific project that I had worked on. And I kind of froze and, for some weird reason, I didn't feel at the time that I could answer that question on behalf of the magnitude of the team that worked on that project. And that was such a learning experience for me because when I left there, I botched the answer, of course. But when I left there and reflected, I was like, why? I had really valuable experience on the project. I may not have been running the whole process, but I was a part of every process of the project. And I should have had the confidence to sell myself and sell that. And I just didn't. And we didn't get the job, but
she didn't botch the question.
It was something that was just, kind of, I realized that, especially now owning, our firm, you have to be able to sell yourself in instances like that, and you just can't be shy about it.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. See, yeah, Peter.
For the panel in general, where do you get your inspiration from, and more importantly, how do you find out new technologies or materials, because the world evolves so quickly? And in my world of residential, I get my inspiration. I love to travel, hotels, hospitalities, where I get phenomenal ideas, and lighting, and all these resources that come together, particularly with your working independent. Where do the ideas come from, and how is exposure so important, and how do you start bringing that to the table?
There's like 1,000, blogs or whatever. I mean, digitally, so much information comes in, on a daily basis, like through Design and Design Boom and Cello and all of the stuff, right? That those ideas, almost you have to hold the floodgates against them because there's too many of them. And I'll have clients that start to get into that source of information, right? And it used to just be ripping something out of a magazine. Now they're forwarding me stuff from digital design stuff, I think of how hard it was 30 years ago especially like you're in Jackson Hole and there's no internet. Right? I mean, just think about that. Like, where do you get your information from? Architectural record, it's here. Now it's so fluid. I agree. I do the same thing with travel. I get a lot of ideas about from hospitality. And the other thing is just things that are with you, like, I don't know, the stuff I learned in Jackson Hole about the infiltration of natural light as a motivator for a residential design. You could take that one medium and design a whole project around it, right? And we always try to find something to latch onto so that every project counts. Each one has an idea, and we're not just going through the motions and doing a project because we have the project to do. But it's artistically chaotic sometimes, right? Because you don't have an idea until the last moment. You're still scribbling around and trying to get some partie to work out. But it's done through architecture with a capital A.
I will say I'll be that person, but so during the pandemic, travel has always been a huge thing for us. We love to, whether it's in the country, in state, out of state, another country. That's always been a huge inspiring motivator for us. But during the pandemic, when suddenly that was out of the question, Instagram we found to actually be quite an exceptional tool because suddenly we had access to all these amazing firms around the world, and to the point where if you had a question, you can simply DM that firm and reach out. And so that has been quite a strong tool that we have used to look for inspiration. You can save images, for precedent images for projects. And yeah, just being able to reach out and learn about new up and coming firms in other states and here, even in Denver. So.
But what do you do when you're on hour 4 of wood joinery videos?
Keep going.
You can go down the rabbit hole.
That is trouble. But I'd agree. I mean, for me, I think travel is probably the biggest one. There's so much there that you can learn and see, and I try and experience space as much as possible in new spaces and see different things. But the other piece I think is education and just being involved with the generation that's coming up. They're so much smarter than us, and they see some crazy things that are coming up and different ideas, and just trying to be as involved as I can in different levels and different worlds. And that's part of why we started Immersion Workshop, was to get just like-minded architects in the same room and talk to each other. And a lot like your podcast, it's we learn from our peers at the end of the day. So.
Yeah. Okay, let's do one last question if there's one from the crowd. No. So last thing, what's one bit of advice you'd give to me or other early founders and how to start a firm or what not to do? Let's start with you guys over there.
I mean, for me, I think it's just go for it. Like Joana was saying about the experience and about, even talking about fake it till you make it. I think in some ways, maybe that's true, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of knowledge that you have that you maybe don't think you have. And just to have that confidence and have that, okay, I'm just going to figure it out and make it work, because there's no right time, I don't think. Just kind of go for it.
Yeah, and
see what happens.
don't, like I was saying before, don't sell yourself short. If you're at the point where you're thinking about starting your own firm or in the process of starting your own firm, you know what you're doing. So yeah, just own that.
Have rich parents.
Yeah.
If they were giving them out, I have to stop them.
Are you looking to adopt, Stephen? Are you? Yeah, you have adopted.
Yeah, but it is understanding the complexity of what we do and what's required of you. You have to be a generalist to some degree. You can't be blinders on. I just follow what I like to do. I mean, you really have to understand that even if you're not good at it, you need to know a lot. You need to know a little about many things, and you obviously know probably a lot about certain things, but you have to spread that out until you find out what it is you really do well and how could you assign the other things to someone who does it better than you.
I would sort of just mimic what they're both saying, but just jump, I think. For me, it was a weird decision. I worked at my other firm for 3 years, moonlighting, before I decided to leave. And it was like the month I took off and actually started getting in front of people's faces and working and marketing and pushing is when things started to happen. And I'd say every step of the way with this firm, it's when I made a decision or I said yes in a position where I didn't really feel comfortable doing that. Or the back of my mind, the logical part was like, this is a horrible idea.
Screaming at you.
Every one of those decisions that I said yes to turned out incredibly well and propelled me in a level that I wouldn't expect. So just, say yes, take a leap, risk.
I think the design world, it's so small that, like I was saying, those relationships can be important. One of our really good clients, I worked with him while I was at another firm, and then out of the blue, 2.5 years later, he called me. He's like, "I need you to do another project." Okay. So, it's you never know where that's going to come from. So.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you all for being here and sharing stories, and thank you for everybody for showing up today. And this is fun. I've been wanting to do this for a while, and so this was a great event to start it up and see real faces. So thank you. Cool.
And I just wanted to thank Adam and let you guys know that out there, in addition to the orange bags, we have some copies of this issue of the magazine, and there's a little profile on Adam in there, so you can learn a little bit more about what he's doing. He forgot to mention that when he was starting.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to thank Pair Workplace for helping host today. Very grateful to Joana for helping be part of that. So thank you guys very much, and appreciate you guys coming down today.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you for listening to this week's show.
You can visit architecting.com, that's architect-ing.com, to see images from this week's guest.
And please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.
Have a great week and keep connecting.